lockdowns, and we were in lockdowns, and it's a different environment today. And just probably about 2, 3 weeks ago, what I was hearing is, mandates may come back around inside of like having masks being required. But then reading an article yesterday, I got another viewpoint that we're actually having a decline inside of COVID. So there's been quite a bit of shift and changes over the last few years. And curious, from you, both Carmen and Oscar, you both bring such unique perspectives. Oscar, you're in the legal field, so you're seeing the shifts and changes from a law standpoint, and you're also seeing what cases are going into litigation. So you've sort of seeing what's hitting on from a legal standpoint. And Carmen, from your side, you're a human resource consultant and specialist, and you're working with employers on a day-to-day basis. So the laws are coming in or the regulations are shifting, and then you're having to work with the employers, with the employees to get the buy-in, to get those shifts to be made. So curious to hear from, the different perspectives that you bring. Like, what have you seen from where we've been at, the last 2-3 years to where we're arriving? What is the summary of like 2022?
So, go ahead. I'll share briefly from my perspective, and what I've been seeing with our clients is, it was a quick shift. Having to make really, really quick decisions in the beginning of 2020. First of all, just from whether or not you're going to go from, being in the office to allowing your team members to work from home. And then finding out, okay, what are all the other little things that we have to do, reimbursements, allowances, just a variety of things that came into play that nobody thought about for a moment. And now, as we've shifted a little bit kind of into hybrid situations, and employees still feeling like, hey, I've been working at home for a year and a half, why do you want me back in the office? It's been working. I think, what I'm seeing is that employers are also feeling that camaraderie is just not present, and engagement between teams is not present. And it's one of the reasons why they want to bring teams back into the workplace, even if it's on a hybrid schedule. And then the other thing that I'm seeing is that some companies are like, hey, you know what? This is working for me. This is saving me a lot of money. I don't have the large overhead. I can downsize on my office space. And I'm even open to hiring out of state. And then it's looking at, okay, now what are the things that I have to do to consider those things? What are the employment laws in other states if I'm going to consider that? Or what changes do I need to be aware of now? I think that 2023 is a year of expansive change, and a year where we have to be more cautious and more aware of what the employment changes are, the employment law changes, and our policies and our handbooks. I think that's going to be a critical piece for 2023.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much a summary of essentially what happened. When COVID first hit, there was a tremendous amount of change that was kind of being forced on employers. A lot of them didn't have the ability or capacity to actually have people working from home. And all of a sudden, now you have to start implementing communication, conferencing stuff. I work with kind of smaller employers. They're not, ready and able to invest a tremendous amount of money in communications. But thankfully, I think we were at a time period where the internet and all the different ways of communicating, everybody being able to have a cell phone or being able to make a call, I think that made it a big difference. So I think the 2020s, all the way to the time of the vaccine, was a time of adjustment for employers. It was just a huge change for employers, and it was either close down or find a way to adjust. And thankfully, a lot of employers were nimble enough to do that. I think we got past that. I think a lot of the issues that Carmen kind of raised, how do I reimburse? Do I have to reimburse? What are my policies regarding, somebody working from home? Do I have to reimburse for telephone? Do I have to reimburse for the fact that they might set up an office in their house? So all these issues came up, and I think the laws are pretty much in place that I think you can apply them in the context, so you were able to adjust. And I think after the vaccine, kind of the stress kind of went away, and employers now were able to kind of reopen, but not fully. They were nimble enough to, for one, they were required to, but if somebody got sick, they could send them home and then bring them back. And so, and I think we're just kind of still in that period. I think 23 is going to be the time period where we're going to see what the future is going to look like, because right now I think a lot of employers are still having people work from home. A lot of companies are debating whether they should bring somebody back, everybody back or anything. So that's what's going on right now. There's some pushback by a lot of employees. They don't want the commute anymore. They might be able to take care of a kid when they're home. So all these savings, both in time and money, are playing into the decision. It will be interesting, I think, what employers are going to do, because I do think that Carmen is correct, that there is a kind of esprit de corps that happens when you're in the office that you lose, even if you meet regularly on online. And I think a lot of employers are kind of beginning to. And I also think that it's going to be kind of a unique thing. It's going to be whether, one, the owner actually believes that having people in the office is a big deal. It may also be capacity. If it's a business that needs people, you're going to have to bring them. And then, there's going to be the ones that are kind of hybrid and mixed, and that creates its own issues, because some people are going to have to come to the office and others don't. And that creates, kind of jealousies and stuff. So I think 2023 is going to be the time period where we're going to see what's going to happen, what employers are going to do. And my sense is it's going to be a mix of all the things that we discussed. And some businesses are going to be fine having people work at home, and others that won't, or a mixture of that.
Yeah, I remember in our preparation conversations leading up to today, one of the things that struck me that you said is, 2022 has been that year where we landed with COVID. The prior years were like shock. The second year we're like surviving and adjusting. And this was sort of the year where like the rubber meets the road. We've been with COVID for a while. We've been with vaccines. We've been with mandates. And it grabbed my attention when you said, we've landed.
Yeah.
And in a sense we have, because, what I also hear from you and Carmen is that now we know how the pieces move to be able to survive or navigate through the different shifts and changes. And I think we've seen some, organizations that have actually thrived because their employers gained that mobility and the flexibility. They don't no longer have to commute. I know in our case, in Insurance, we've always believed in technology. So we've been in the cloud space way before COVID was coming around. So when it came to transitioning, it's almost like, COVID pushed us off the nest to be able to fly and embrace our technology and the lifestyle that we were creating for ourselves and for team members. And not all employers were at that stage, or organizations were at that stage. And, if you're a restaurant, you can't do that. Now, there are some issues that you are pointing to, and I could see it from an insurance standpoint, right? Now that, employees have been mobile, I mean, we're hearing the stories of, Mexico City had a flood of, Americans coming to work there during the pandemic, or they moved to the mountains, so they moved back home and, now can work remotely. And from a workers' compensation insurance standpoint, it creates a whole new exposure, right? If you have employees now working in a different state, are you seeing, employers, update their policies to cover workers' comp or employment law regulations from there? What are some of the issues? Because we've sort of just jumped into the water, and now, we're sort of seeing like, okay, how is this going to work long term? What are some of the issues that you see from that? Like, because I think sometimes not knowing or being caught in an urgent situation, you make certain choices and then you go back and sort of resolve them. And I'm thinking of employers who have employees that are working in different countries, or their employees moved to a different country during COVID, or they moved to a different state. What are some of the issues that you see from there? And like, what are some of the things, how do you approach that? And Carmen, I think, you're in that area. And I like to hear, Oscar, from the legal perspective, what are some of the things you notice? And then Carmen, I'd like to go back with you. How do employers begin to approach that conversation of bringing, everything into compliance?
Well, I have seen some questions dealing mostly with the payroll issues, where, what if somebody moves to Idaho? And I actually had the situation where somebody just bought a big house in Idaho and moved over there and work remotely. What are the essentially the tax consequences of that? You're paying them wages from California, but where does the work take place? And to be honest with you, I don't know enough tax law. What I refer them to a CPA or a tax lawyer, because I honestly don't know, and I don't think that that's something that is completely resolved. There are other issues that come up in terms of the workers' compensation. Imagine if you have an employee who's working in Idaho and the phone rings for work. They have a special phone, rings for work. They're running to the office, they trip on a chair and they break a leg. Is that a workers' compensation? And these are all issues that, to be honest with you, I don't have answers, but these are issues that employers are going to have to face. And if the workers' compensation laws don't take care of it, then the courts are gonna make a determination. From an employment law perspective, California's laws can be applied to somebody who's traveling here, but you run into the same issues. What if that person in Idaho is in a call with their supervisor and their supervisor essentially sexually harasses that person? That gives rise to very interesting issues. Is Idaho law the one that applies, or is California law? And I think one way to manage all this risk is, after consulting attorneys and experts in each field, I think you need to probably come up with some sort of policy where the employee and the employer arrive at an agreement that can be enforced. California has some very protective statutes, and so a lot of employers want to get out of California, but California also has some laws that kind of even prevent that from happening. There's a specific law that basically says that you can't choose a different jurisdiction in exchange for an employment agreement. So you have to consult an attorney and address it and devise essentially a policy or an employee handbook plan and that addresses these issues. And generally, courts will abide by what you do as long as it doesn't go against public policy or other law. But these are all questions that come up with the new setup. If someone stays in California, it's not that complicated from that perspective. But people are moving to other states. It's just especially if you can get a salary from Los Angeles and Idaho, with what you could pay for a 2-bedroom apartment for rent and somewhere in the valley, you could probably get a big ranch house in Idaho. So, and people are making those decisions. So I think that's probably kind of the unknown at this point, how the law is going to handle that. So we'll see how that plays out. But yeah, these are interesting issues. There's some cases, but they're not directly applicable. There's airline cases of that people, flight attendants who come to LA and they try to sue under California law or something like that, but that's not directly on point. So should be interesting how this case is resolved.
Absolutely, I agree. And then just to add, to Oscar's first point around moving to another state, now working from another state. Many employers don't even realize that, hey, now I need to register with EDD and, the other states. That's one thing. And then the other thing is that because employees are really not sharing this upfront and they're not being, um, upfront with their employers about their moves, their medical insurance may not be active at a certain point because it's California based and not, not available in another state, particularly if you have something like Kaiser. And so those are definitely the sort of things that are coming up. And that's actually how employers are discovering that their employees have moved to another state because, hey, my insurance does not work. And, what's going on? Did you guys not pay your bill? Oh, well, let's look into this. No, we are actually trying to use it. And I'm just going to say Idaho. Yeah. And so it's the reason why it's not active. But there's so many things that are showing up, and we have to ask more questions, and have surveys. I think that's probably one of the best things that as an employer, what you can do, and develop a survey that's going to help you determine, what your team members are thinking, what they're planning, where they are.
And that's a great point, Carmen, because you look at Instagram, Facebook, social media, and you see the posts of where people are working from, and you bring a great point. If the employee made that choice on their own and didn't check in with the employer, how does workers' comp, how do employment laws apply at that point where the employee is actually the one initiating a shift and change, and there hasn't been approval or alignment from the employer. And is this, are we seeing a new sort of agreement or affidavit or in addition to the employee handbook that needs to be considered at this point?
Not from my perspective at this point, but I do think that you need to figure out, one, if this is an issue for you. Not everybody's facing this issue, but if it is something where you need to address it, I think a survey, as Carmen was saying, especially if you have a lot of people, you need to find out if that's an issue. The last thing you want to do is find out when somebody's actually has been hurt or wants to use that insurance card and it doesn't work, and now that person is not covered, but they have a very serious issue. So you want to address this before, and then that way you have the ability to make changes, make adjustments, and figure out what your obligations are. Like you said, if a person chooses to leave, do they carry, do they have the ability to essentially impose obligations because of their choice? And, I would say that it could. And so you want to find out whether that's an issue. And if it is, then by all means, I think you need to consider some sort of policy that addresses these issues. And you have to be kind of holistic on this. You can't just say, California employment law will apply, or, because you have to address the other issues like the workers' compensation. You have to address are there any obligations in terms of paying taxes in the new state? I would say if the person who moves to Idaho and is working from there, Idaho has a perfectly good argument to say, look, this person is actually working in Idaho for you. And that means that you're essentially have to register with Idaho and pay us our taxes. I don't know if that's the case, but I think that Idaho could have a legitimate argument in that sense. So you need to figure this out before it's an issue, before Idaho comes knocking and says, hey, you know what, you owe us X amount of money, or somebody gets injured and you're finding out for the first time that they're in Idaho. So yes, I think that that's an issue. And if it is, then you definitely need to figure out the answer and then consider whatever policy you need to do for yourself.
You're reminding me of something, with regards to in our industry and insurance, how we look at it as the best time to have insurance is before an incident happens.
Yeah.
Things happen, it's already too late. Yeah. And I'm hearing you point to a similar scenario here. The other thing I'm hearing from both of you is the importance of an employee handbook. And, I think the large corporations that have the resources with human resource teams and everything managing, they're keeping up with those shifts over the years and working with, clients. Some of them really embrace the employee handbook. Others are just have it as something that they need to have. And I think we're at a point where it doesn't matter what size of an organization you are, whether you have a part-time or a full-time staff of 100 or 150, the importance of having an up-to-date employee handbook and staying in tune with how the environment has shifted and what may be happening in your workforce is now more critical than ever.
Yep. Yeah, the employee handbook, and I think Carmen can probably testify more to this because she probably works with it more, but I mean, the employee handbook, when you're implementing it, one of the things that happens is that you're talking to the owners all the time about, we have this policy, you can do this, you can do that, or you can do this. So you're making choices. And because you're making choices, that means you're looking at it and analyzing and saying, look, I want that policy, I want X amount of vacation days, or I want this policy. If I had paid sick leave, do I want the accrual method with all the craziness that comes with it, or do I want the upfront method? So by going through that process, you are putting eye to paper and analyzing all these issues. And if you do it on a regular basis, there's a good chance that you're going to be addressing issues. If you just have an employee handbook and put it away, after 3 years, it probably is very much out of date. And there's a lot of stuff there that you probably can't even apply. And what happens is it's also kind of like what you were saying. They pull it out when there's an issue and say, well, okay, what policy did this guy violate and can we fire? And so, the employee handbook is important for that. But it's kind of a prospective looking document, but it's also your set of rules, and you need to keep them up to date because the law changes. Every year there's a new set of laws, and sometimes the new laws change what came before. So if you're using an outdated, you can take an action that your employee handbook says yes, that maybe it was even vetted by an employment law attorney 2 years ago, but now it's out of date, and now you make a decision, or you take a decision that is contrary to the current law, and then you have an issue on your hand.
Yeah. Any thoughts on your side, Carmen, on that?
Yes, I mean, I agree with Oscar's comments on that. And also, one of the other things that I'm noticing is that, sometimes employers, it's very daunting, right? I mean, a handbook is not, a happy read. I mean, it's a policy manual is what it is. And it's a space where we do keep, those policies, procedures, rules and regulations, benefits and communication for our team members. And it is something that we should be familiar with. I engage the owners, the managers, and the employees by every year when we update the employee handbook. We actually have a meeting. We sit down and have a roundtable of like, hey, here's your handbook, take a peek at it. We're going to go through some of the policies in the handbook. If there's a particular policy that interests you, please let us know and we'll debrief on it. And so we'll have a session, an hour and a half session or so with the entire team to go over the handbook, because the truth is, Carlos, and you probably know this, Oscar, that people don't read the handbook. It's too long. There are too many things. And so that's the reason why we make it engaging for the team and for the management to be able to look at it. What we don't want is, we don't want an employee to go to a manager and to inquire, about a policy, and then the manager, because they haven't read the handbook, they give a response that makes sense to them, or they give a response that, oh, you know what, this is a great employee, I'm going to make an exception for them, and this is how I'm going to handle it with them. But then the next person comes and asks for the same thing, and like, well, no, you know what, that employee is late all the time, they're always calling out sick, or their performance is not up to par, and so I'm going to say no to that person.
Yeah.
And so now what we're doing is, I mean, there's a potential, singling people out. There's, preferred treatment to someone, right? And potentially someone could call this discrimination. I mean, there's so many things that can happen when we don't follow the handbook that we have in place to support you. it's really what it is. It's a handbook to guide you. It's so easy to follow the policies that you've implemented because you have your handbook. Just open it up. So I always tell my clients, hey, whatever issue comes to you, go to your handbook, highlight it, and put a little sticky note on there so that next time it comes up, it's easily available for you to reference. Use it, use it as many people use their Bible as well, right? Highlight and mark it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of employers don't do that. They do everything but the last step, and the last step is so important, and that is that training that you're saying, Carmen. They get the employee handbook, paid a decent amount of money, and it goes on the shelf somewhere, and then that information is not passed on to the people who are best able to prevent a lot of the things, and that's your line supervisors. By the time something hits HR, by the time somebody hits the CFO, CEO, or somebody, there's been 2 or 3 managers who've already made decisions that could create an issue for you. So you want to head that issue at the first step. And if you don't do that training, then you miss that opportunity. And I think that's why that training is so important. And you shouldn't miss the last step. That's like running 25 miles in a marathon and then just kind of stopping there. It's just, it doesn't make sense.
You're both pointing to, and like what's resonating for me is an exciting opportunity that the employee handbook can become, or is. It's like a low-hanging fruit. Most employers, even in our industry, one of the challenges they're having is attracting, recruiting, and retaining talent. There's so much mobility, people moving out of state, people moving to different companies, and so forth. And one of the things I'm hearing, and what both of you are sharing, is that this employee handbook is sort of like the glue between the employer and the employee. Oftentimes it's like there's the employer and there's the employee, and they're 2 very separate entities, and they're like at odds with one another. One is telling the other one what to do, and the other one wants more, life, and I'm sort of, using like that metaphor of, it's almost like a sandwich, right? It's like you have the employer as a bun, and you have the employee as a bun, and then you have the employee handbook that sort of glues it together. And it's actually an exciting piece of document. Over the last several years, I've been spending more time with our employee handbook and really looking at how do we bring it forth into where, as from a leadership standpoint in our company, being able to embrace it as something that employees and team, and we moved away from employees. We use more of team members as our distinction within our company. And so as a team, how do we collectively create this employee handbook that has it be enjoyable, workable for all of us? So there is that step of opening up those doors. When I was doing some training courses, one of the things with Dale Carnegie at that time, I remember the leader of it said, people support a world they're part of creating. And that stood with me. And it looked like, in the past, we've created handbooks from leadership creates it. And now, at least from our view, is like, how do we bring in our team members to be part of it and to help us create a culture that hits on the metrics and the goals and targets as a company, but it also begins to enhance and expand their lifestyle. And that's the opportunity that I'm hearing and seeing, and I could see in that environment I could see creating an environment and a culture where it's actually more friendly rather than litigious and more of claims and arguments and disagreements. And it's sort of what you're pointing to, Oscar, is better to create it now before it becomes an issue.
Yeah.
One thing that I've, as you both were sharing, we've been through some dark times. There's a moment where toilet paper was an issue and people were fighting over it, and it looked like very doom and gloom. And I think we've arrived at this 2022 where we have our feet in the ground. And I do see it as an excitement. I could see it out. I could see new businesses opening. I could see businesses that made it through the pandemic and some of the more challenging times. And as we look into the future, into like 2023, we've gotten a good sense over the last 3 years. And Oscar, as you pointed, we sort of landed on our feet with regards to COVID. What are some of the, from your perspectives, like looking at the crystal ball, what can we see into the future? What should employers be thinking? Is there any legislation that's coming that you think employers should keep an eye on?
Yeah, I mean, California is always active in terms of the legislation. So yeah, there's always new laws coming. This coming year, there's a couple of few changes, and I think Carmen was going to talk about this, but since I started talking first, I'm sorry, Carmen. But basically, there's additions to the anti-discrimination rules. Essentially, I guess as a result of the Dobbs decision, California passed a law that basically protects reproductive rights of women. And that it doesn't just mean abortion, but all reproductive services that you may access, they're protected. Kind of an interesting change that happened is that now it would be illegal for going forward, and this is going to be 2024 though. There's a new law that will come into place not this year, but the following year, that basically makes it illegal for employers to discriminate on the basis of cannabis use for off duty. So it kind of, they're applying almost kind of the alcohol use. You know, you can't come to work drunk, but you know, we're not going to punish you for drinking over the weekend. But what that means is that a lot of the tests that are applied, technically they use hair, and it can't tell you when that person was high. It just says that they used it at some point. And I think there is a time period. So all these rules and stuff is going to change. So California is active when it comes to this. But I think more broadly, I think we're getting past COVID. Now, I think you have to throw a caveat there that if there is a variant that comes back and creates issues again, I wouldn't be surprised if additional steps are taken to kind of bring it back and control it. Maybe even actually having us stay home. I think that's probably very unlikely. I don't think anyone wants to do that in the legislature, but I think you can't say no, because something really crazy can happen that forces their hand. But I think masking could come back. But I think if one thing is true is that the vaccines, whatever your opinion is, the vaccines did work. And what they did is they took away all that fear and pressure and all the craziness that came with that. It's kind of gone away. Some people didn't want to take the vaccine, fine. Now we're kind of, if I'm protected, then I don't care if you're not vaccinated. Before it was different. If somebody's not vaccinated, they could get me sick, and then now you're putting my health into danger. So now I think all of that is going away. So I think what we're looking into the 2023 and beyond, I think where we're going is what are we going back to? What are we reclaiming from pre-COVID? And I think we are going to reclaim some things, but there's some things that we're not going to reclaim. There's going to be some industries that are going to be forever changed. I think definitely teleworking and telecommuting and all this ability to do work almost from anywhere, that's going to be in place. And then some more in some industries than others. Some employees will demand it as part of their employment agreement. And I think all of that is going to have to be worked out by employers. And I think employers' views on things is also going to be very important. Some employers, like you guys, you embrace technology, so you're fine with it. You feel like, hey, if the person can do the work, and they want to be in Cancun, and as long as they're doing the work, we're fine with that. Other employers may not feel that way, or maybe not that comfortable. What does that mean? So that means that maybe somebody who wants that is going to go find a job where a company provides those services. So I think where we're going is we're figuring out what the workplace is going to look in the next 2 or 3 years, and whether a lot of the stuff that we adopted for COVID is going to remain. I mean, I know the law is changed a lot. You know, we're able now to make appearances in court using essentially this system. We are able to file stuff, you know, online. I can get on and get the accounts. I can get documents and everything. So that's going to remain. It's just made it so much easier. If I don't have to go downtown, I can do an appearance for 20 minutes or 30 minutes. Whereas before it took me 2.5 hours. I don't have to bill the client 2 hours of that. So all this efficiency, I think, is going to stay. And it's an economic system. Whatever's efficient will remain. Whatever is inefficient generally doesn't.
That's a great summary. Thank you, Oscar. Carmen, from your side, what is the future looking like from a human resource standpoint? In an entrepreneurial, you run and operate your own business as well. So you have, you know, you're living like some of your clients, or experiencing some of the issues that your own clients are having.
Yes, that is true. I think, you know, some of the things for employers to be on the lookout for as it relates to, you know, some of the new employment law changes that are coming up is, you know, to evaluate like even just time off, because there are certain leaves that you're not required to provide, or, you know, employers, especially smaller employers, are feeling like, oh, you know, I'm not required to give bereavement leave. I'm not required to give vacation time or holidays, right? However, how much is that impacting your ability to really create a core team, and, you know, to really have a team stay with you, because the benefits are so demanding right now. There's a lot of competition, and if as a small employer you're not able to give those type of benefits, you know, you're not going to be able to create that team that you want in order to grow. So what I'm looking at, you know, with some of my smaller clients is that, okay, so in the past, you didn't have to give vacation time, and you still don't. I mean, there is no law that says you have to offer paid vacation time. But there was also no law, the law also said that you could offer bereavement time unpaid, and you still can, but many employers were just not offering it. And so there's a new law that's going to be going into effect, right, that employers with 5 or more employees must now provide up to 5 days. It's still unpaid, but now there is that requirement that you do have to allow time for bereavement time. And so what I'm seeing is that, where can we be more generous? You know, where do we have the ability to offer benefits that are going to keep your team, you know, happy, content, and wanting to move forward and grow with you? I think that's what I'm going to be talking about, like with my clients, and guiding them and helping them find ways to be more creative, so that the generosity comes. And not only generosity, but it's like really caring about your team members, right? You mentioned it earlier, Carlos, and obviously, you know, we're on the same page. Like, this is something that I know we've been working on for a handful of years at least, is, you know, shifting from like staff, employees, workers, right, to having a more caring, you know, frame of mind when it comes to the team that you work with. So those are the things that are coming up for us.
And one thing I think I did leave out, and that is that, and I think Carmen, you know, we've seen it because I think we've spoken in the past, and that is that the California legislature has begun to start implementing requirements for smaller and smaller companies. For example, the California Family Rights Act, you know, before it was, you had to have 50 employees. Now it applies to a company of 5 employees or more. And I think the new bereavement law applies to 5 employees. So I think they are making a decision to go and impose obligations on smaller and smaller companies, whereas before there were some obligations for smaller companies, but they almost gave you the room to make mistakes and grow. They're not doing that, and that'll make it very risky for for smaller companies, the time period of the first employee to like the 20th employee, it's a big time period for the entrepreneur. It's just, they're busy making sure that the business is running right. So they're not even thinking about some of these things. And it's very dangerous for them not to do that anymore. So I think the legislature has kind of made a decision to start imposing these obligations at a much lower threshold for a number of employees. And I think I do see that continuing in the future.
There's so many more questions and just conversations from the cannabis use, for being able from the cannabis use for medicinal purposes. How does that going to impact the employer? How is, technology going to continue to shift how we work and how we do things and the different changes? We had a question that came in and we have 1 minute, and Carmen, I'll ask this question to you. It's from one of our participants, and it's, how do you keep that, the culture moving when you have people in multiple states, right? You have the Christmas party that used to take place. You have the water cooler moments that you would find in the office. But now with people working in different remote areas, how do you keep that workforce moving?
Oh, that's a great
Connected to the
question.
company.
Yes, absolutely. And I see it happening. It's actually happening right now. And so what I am seeing is in one situation, I have a company who does a monthly get together, and it's a 1-hour session that they have set up on a monthly basis. People show up on Zoom because, people are working remotely from the office or, like you said, out of state. And so they're playing games, they're hunting for items, and they are asking each other questions. They are making, doing kind of like you remember in school going up in front of the classroom and you had to do a 15-minute presentation on how to make something, and someone's making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, so I mean, they are doing things, they're being creative. That's definitely one way. I have another company who does fly out their team members from other states to come, twice a year for an annual retreat, and then for a holiday dinner, and a couple of days of engaging with team members here. So, but it is very difficult. You have to be creative. Again, it just depends on the number of team members that you have in other states. Do whatever you can. Ask your team. Ask them what they want, and they will definitely tell you. I think that that's one of the biggest things that we can do, is ask what they want, and they'll tell you. Be prepared to be able to follow through, right? When they ask.
Right. And so I think one last question that comes to mind is working remotely a benefit, a perk, or a right? And where is it now, and where do you see it going into the future?
To Carmen or Oscar?
To I think there's two perspectives, one from
Okay.
the culture of
I
the
think
company
so.
and one from a legal.
Okay, Carmen, go ahead first. Let me
Okay.
think of an answer.
Okay, you got it. So, I think the truth is, I think it's a perk. I do believe that while we know that, yes, it can work, it's a perk. And it's also a perk that we have to be very cautious with. And I think that, Oscar might, be able to touch a little bit more on this, because there are certain positions that, require you to be in-house on a regular basis, as opposed to some of the positions that you could, go back and forth and be more of a hybrid. So we have to be very cautious in, how we make those decisions and how we address that with our team. And Oscar, I mean, I think if you, I would love just to hear your perspective as well, right? From that space of, how do we make the right decision?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a perk. It's employers have the right to require that you show up to the place of work, wherever you want to make that. Remember, what you're doing as an employer is you're paying for somebody's time, and so you can have them show up. Now, it's becoming something that employees expect, almost like vacation or other things. And so, healthcare and like other perks that you get. So it's definitely becoming expected, but it's still a perk, and it's still something that the employer can control and mold. I've actually had a couple of clients who've come to me where somebody actually gets a doctor's note and basically says, this person has a medical condition and they should be working from home. And it happens all the time. Basically they're trying to use the different medical leave laws so that they can actually get the perk of working from home. And there's ways to address that. The doctor should not be telling you what the accommodation is, but I've seen it happen, a lot of times. And what that tells me, and the issue kind of came up like 2 or 3 times with the same employer. What that tells me is that, their labor force is keen on actually working from home. So they're, these people are getting creative, and you have to treat your employees fairly, but you have to remember that your employees are as creative or maybe more creative than you are because they have more time to think about things. So they'll come up with ways, and it's easier for you to start thinking about these things in advance rather than be reacting to them. Because even if the doctor's note is, maybe that's not an appropriate way of doing it, as soon as an employee presents a doctor's note, that is an issue that you need to address and make sure that you don't cross the line, because it could be something that is medical. And if it is, then all this plethora of laws apply. But if it's just somebody trying to kind of essentially get away with working from home through the doctor's note, then you have to also do that. Because if you do it, if you allow it for one, they're going to tell somebody else. And we saw this with the vaccination and the vaccination requirement, the exemption for medical and religious reasons. People started using those two as exceptions for them not having to be vaccinated. And it was clear that the medical one was not a good one because you could ask for a doctor's note. Well, everybody found some sort of religion who didn't want to take a vaccine, and they provided a doctor's note or some sort of literature, and it put the employer in a very tough place. So employees get creative, and but I do think that the first question an employer should think about it is, do I really need these people here? And are they benefiting? Is this a benefit that maybe I can provide and the employees are going to be happy? Am I going to get the work that I need and they're going to be happy? So going back to that employee handbook and the way you were addressing this, Carlos, is the employee handbook gives you the ability to essentially say, what's the philosophy? What's the way I view my business? Is it me just trying to make money? Is it me? Do I see these employees as someone who are partners in this thing, or is this just workers? I mean, whatever your philosophy is, that's your opportunity. And so, however you see them, you need to start thinking about that. If it is a perk and you're getting your work done and you're getting what you need from what you're paying them, I say, if both sides are happy, then that means you're going to have happy employees. So,
and I think that's a great perspective to complete this conversation on, Oscar. Is really a co-creation. We're sharing the environment, we're sharing the places, we're contributing to the economy, we're contributing to the workforce, and employers, entrepreneurs are creating opportunities for people to step into, and it's teamwork all around. It's how we've come to see it. I want to thank you both. Carmen, thank you for joining us. I know you're not feeling well, and you're still here with us. So thank you for joining us. And Oscar, thank you for your time as well. And thank you for everyone who joined us and listened into this conversation. We appreciate you being part of it and asking questions and being curious and looking at what the future is holding. With that, happy holidays. Our next conversation is going to be in January. Oscar, Carmen, I'm excited to have you both next year. And for future conversations. And thank you, everyone. Happy holidays, happy New Year, Merry Christmas, happy Hanukkah, happy everything that's happening to complete this year. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good one. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays, everyone.